Suppose we were in the marketplace one day and we noticed someone laughing at us as we went by. This event will signify this or that to us according to whether this or that drive happens at that moment to be at its height in us. And it will be quite different event according to the kind of person we are. One person will absorb it like a drop of rain. Another will shake it from him like an insect. Another will try to pick a quarrel. Another will examine his clothing to see if there is something about it that might give rise to laughter. Another will be led to reflect on the nature of laughter as such. Another will be glad to have involuntarily augmented the amount of cheerfulness and sunshine in the world. And in each case, a drive has gratified itself, whether it be the drive to annoyance or to combativeness or to reflection or to benevolence. This drive sees the event as its prey. Why precisely this one? Because thirsty and hungry, it was lying in wait. End quote.
Well, that's actually okay to respond to that. I I think that aspect of the this idea of those drives lying thirsty and hungry and wait, ready to express themselves or play themselves out according to whatever experience we have. Like if we get laughed at or whatever, you know what it reminds me of is and it's actually a freaking awesome segue into this first question that I have. Okay, because I've got some, and just to preface, I've got some dumb guy questions today. I've tried to really pull back from where I was with the reading, where I was like, and I'm trying to really just retread some basic ground today. So, I mean, I will try not to ask too stupid of questions, but I want to kind of do that. So leading into that, on this notion of these drives, right? Where let's say somebody tells me, like we talked about, somebody says that I don't know anything or whatever, and I have some particular drive that exercises itself in response to that. What that makes me think of, and I'm sure, Nevitt, maybe you might sympathize with this, is what that makes me immediately think of is that the Zen teaching of the world is like dew. The world is like dew. It is transient and fleeting, right? And not only is it like dew, this physical reality that we live in, but our actions within that world of dewdrops are vanity, are but vanity. At least in a lot of people that and I haven't read a lot, but I would say a lot of the people that I've read that deal with these like Zen or Buddhist inspired teachings or philosophies, or Buddhist philosophies, they seem to center on this point, or not center on, but they seem to always touch on this point of and it's put really really abstractly and kind of violently and authoritatively and dogmatically in the writings of Bushido that I've been reading. I read a new book recently. I've read 3 books now on Bushido by different people in Japanese history, giving their takes, and all 3 seem to confer on this idea that life is but vanity. Life is but vanity, and you are but an actor on a stage acting out your vanity. And I've been thinking about that a lot, about this sense of this internal skepticism and ironic distance that I have from my life for these feelings, and this doubt or skepticism, to where I think that like right now, me talking right now and the idea of me doing it is already kind of, we're getting into some muddy water. But if I consider there's a me that's doing, then me talking right now to y'all, if there is a y'all at all, about these things that I'm interested in, or about my feelings or my experiences or whatever, and my little hand motions and my inflections that kind of try to draw the listener along with me to track my feelings on the matter, where I could burst out into emotion or subdue myself to indicate something like of a subversive element or like a quietude, this theatrical aspect of what I'm doing and this constant, persistent feeling of detachment or ironic distance, it plagues me. At certain points it frees me, and at other points it plagues me with this skepticism about the validity or the genuinity or the sincerity of my feelings or my actions or whatever, if sincerity or authenticity is even possible at all. And that brings me to my first question, which is pretty early on in the reading. So just to get into it, this conjunctive synthesis of consumption-consummation, that's the basic theme of the chapter, at least that's what I got, and it happens to be the title of this section. This conjunctive synthesis of consumption-consummation, beginning with an explication, sort of like Marx starting with talking about commodities. It's like this section starts with talking about objects and impulses commingling on the body without organs as bands of intensity. So following this discussion of bands of intensity, these areas or what is it? The intensive order, the crossing of thresholds and the ravaging of regions and the intensive order as fields of intensity on the body without organs. I can kind of understand that. And I really liked the next page on page 86, this discussion of history like physics, a Joan of Arc effect, a Heliogabalus effect, all the names of history, not the name of the father. The schizophrenic who it says, I am Louis the 15th or 17th, the numerals, Louis the 17th, and all of these other aspects of who has or hasn't tried to be Louis the 17th or whatever, they are brought up into this fold of forces and intensities and whatever, right? But it gets confusing on page 87. The first snag for me in the reading was on page 87, and this comes back to the vanity and the theatricality and all that. And I'll read it. I guess yes. Okay. Let us see. It is true that reality has ceased to be a principle. They're talking about the schizo glides in order to be everywhere something real is produced, everywhere something real has been and will be produced. It is true that reality has ceased to be a principle. According to such a principle, the reality of the real was posed as a divisible abstract quantity, whereas the real was divided up into qualified unities, into distinct qualitative forms. But now the real is a product that envelops the distances within intensive quantities. The indivisible is enveloped and signifies that what envelops it does not divide without changing its nature and form. The schizo has no principles. He is something only by being something else. He is Mahud only by being Worm, and Worm only by being Jones. He's a girl only by being an old man who is miming or simulating the girl, or rather by being someone who is simulating an old man simulating a girl, or rather by simulating someone, etc., etc. So this was already true of the completely oriental art of the Roman emperors, the 12 paranoiacs of Suetonius. So my point is that, and then he goes on and he makes this really interesting sentence about Christopher Columbus simulating a false admiral who is simulating a whore who is dancing. This chapter, by the way, had some really cool sentences. Like, just if nothing else, if it was just complete vacuum stuff, it's really cool, right?
The one where it was like mommy's having sex with the missionary and daddy's fucking the postman, like further on. I actually underlined that. I thought that was well said. Like,
yes, I think, this particular, okay, this and then the first sentence of the very next paragraph, but simulation must be understood in the same way as we spoke of identification. Here's my question. This page and the confusion that it brings me is just basic. Is the idea here that the schizo subject, the schizoid subject, the schizotypal subject, or whatever you want to call it, is by simulation, right? And that's my first question. Is the schizo something by simulation of something? And then my further question is this not a ubiquitous thing? Is simulation, and I put in a note here, I am not a schizo, at least I don't think so, and don't I necessarily simulate? And this, to me, is, or at least as far as I'm aware, one of the basic tenets of psychoanalysis. So it's not like Deleuze and Guattari are ignorant of this idea that symbolic castration, one of the most basic elements or parts of symbolic castration, is such that I never fully identify with or am any of my symbolic containers or categories. Yes. And as such, in order to be any symbolic category, like a being, or any symbolic anything, I have to simulate, or I'm playing this. And this is what I think plays a role in that theatricality, in the staging of the analysis, in the emphasis on this classical stage idea or illustration in psychoanalysis that Deleuze is kind of critical of, right? But that's the brunt of my question is, the schizo is by simulation, but aren't we all? Am I like, is that, I don't know, right? Because I mean, as far as I know, again, the psychoanalytic notions of identification, like the most basic definition of identification in psychoanalysis or in the psychoanalytic jargon that I've heard, is identification with a decentered point, identification with something, right? And what that implies is this gap, this distance, this divided subject, this simulation, this, you know what I'm saying? And so that's all. That's my first question is, are they saying that the schizo is by simulation? And if so, am I a schizo? Is everybody a schizo? Or I'm lost here. I'm confused.
I wanted to ask about that too, and I wanted to ask you and Hunter, or you and Chase Hunter, because they, on page 87, simulation is identified with the same way as identification. And they say it must be understood in the same way as we spoke of identification. It expresses those non-decomposable distances always enveloped in the intensities that divide into one another while changing their forms. And I think I underlined gap. They use gap and conjunctive synthesis kind of frequently in parallel or tandem to one another. And I did want to ask if this was kind of like a direct kind of criticism of the Seesaw of Desire lecture by Lacan, because he even admits in that there is a gap when it comes to neurosis and psychosis, and then goes into this huge symbolic representation of desire. So I'm wondering if they're kind of addressing that aspect of the lecture directly, or if this was even written during that time. And they're saying it's less about this representation of desire, but more about this kind of we're seeing the effects of this synthesis that can't really be boiled down to kind of like a logical atomism point of view when it comes to psychoanalysis.
Maybe I'd like to say something about my reading of Nietzsche, and then ask if Chase would respond to your questions in light of that. So I read that paper that Chase posted by, I want to say Kowalski, but I don't think that's right. It's
the one on Klosowski.
Klosowski.
Yeah, which is, so it's a Polish name, but he's French, so you would say it like the French accent, so it'd be like Klosowski.
Okay.
But anyways, Pierre Klosowski. That's what it's about. But it was written by Daniel W. Smith, which is much easier to say.
Yes, I think I'll refer to it as the paper by you suggested reading a lot of stuff by Smith, but that's the most recent one. So I'll assume that I'll talk about the paper by Smith about this guy whose name starts with a K. And so Smith is trying to explain Mr. K's understanding of Nietzsche because it's relevant for understanding how Deleuze interprets Nietzsche. And most of what I read in that paper, there were a few points I could quibble with, but mostly it's pretty consistent with the way I read Nietzsche. And so the way I read him is that each one of us is constituted by, actually, in my view, everything, according to Nietzsche, is constituted by structured wills to power. So kind of like Deleuze's fundamental thing is field of pure difference that I think for Nietzsche, it's like a field of will to power. But that the way that manifests within the human mind, or the human, I don't know, it's not, for Nietzsche, the distinction between mind and body is not so clear. So what constitutes my being is a whole bunch of competing forces, ultimately wills to power. But this, in that paper by Smith, he lists a bunch of drives and instincts and all these different things. And so my being as a whole, what I am, is really constituted by a bunch of competing forces. That's what I am. And then there are, from what I gather from Nietzsche, he thinks there are people there are some people who have a dominating instinct that is so powerful that it's able to ride herd on all those other instincts and create a coherent force and power that throughout their entire lives drives their project, to use a sort of existential term. Most of us, at least I think what Nietzsche would think, is most of us don't have a real, a dominating drive that's that clear. And so we tend to be this, again, constellation of competing forces. And sometimes one wins out and sometimes another one wins out. And at someplace, I can't remember if it's in Genealogy or someplace else, but Nietzsche says the affect of freedom, what I interpret as freedom of will, is actually one of these forces winning over the other forces. So what I experience as freedom is actually I identify, or what I experience as me, is whatever dominant force is currently active. And what freedom, the feeling of freedom, is the feeling of this particular drive or instinct or power, whatever it is, conquering all the others. So the affect of freedom is this feeling of internal conquest. I'm free. I have conquered these other forces. But so we're these constellation. And then in that paper, at the end of the paper by Smith, apparently, and this is Klosowski's interpretation. He admits this is an interpretation. He doesn't have any real supporting evidence other than just his reading of Nietzsche's notes and texts. But he thinks that at the end of Nietzsche's life, what actually happened was, if I understood the last few pages, is Nietzsche's madness was actually Nietzsche's success in breaking the illusion of a coherent ego, because that's an illusion, and learning to kind of surf these different drives and instincts and powers. Oh, is that his book? Yeah. And so that Nietzsche, because he quotes these comments from some of Nietzsche's friends. They would visit him and they would be like, I don't know if he's actually crazy or if he's just kind of pretending to be crazy. So I think that's kind of the schizophrenic. I don't know if I hesitate to say it's an ideal, but that's something that can happen, where Nietzsche's kind of surfing all these different forces and powers and identifying with different ones and just having kind of a grand old time being, identifying with this force and then identifying with that force and then identifying with that force. And so that he has these multiple identities that he can kind of, surf between. They don't use that word in the text, but, and so, when you read that passage, like, I am this, I am that, I am this, I'm guessing that's the kind of thing they're thinking about, is, you can identify with all these different forces. What I don't understand in that passage that Hunter read, and then the comment that, Joey and Joseph were making, I don't understand how that picture is related to this simulation of simulation of simulation thing. And like Joey, I don't really know what he means by, what was that word? A non-decomposable distance. You know, I don't understand how that picture of surfing these different forces fits with those ideas.
Okay, so you just have to learn some topology and some advanced mathematics real quick. Fluid dynamics specifically. And then it's easy, you know, it's just simple as that. No, not really, but well, actually kind of, because really that's what he's taking Klosowski's idea of Nietzsche and the eternal return as this kind of, yeah, there's the subject is a multiplicity, and then this multiplicity, like you're saying, it's this complex of these forces, and this complex of forces, they kind of can join together based off of one dominant force, and that becomes kind of on the more kind of mathematical side, where he's talking about intensities, regions, axes, gradients, this stuff, that becomes something like the specific quality or the tensor in this field, and that becomes associated with like an intensity in a certain region of the body of that organs, and that's what the idea of that would be the proper name that you're given, or that goes along with this feeling of I'm becoming something else. I'm not who I am in this kind of molar restricted sense. And I think that's the kind of, so he connects, got the Klosowski Nietzsche idea, and then you've got these ideas of intensities and this stuff from mathematics, and then that's also kind of tied in, or really this, with this whole idea that he has of schizophrenia kind of in general, more so, not just Nietzsche this time. He's kind of extending it, they're extending it into more of a general idea of this phenomena of what occurs with schizophrenia in a kind of an ideal sense. So that's, yeah, let's see, there's a lot to talk about, but okay, so the non-decomposable distances. So I believe that comes from Bertrand Russell. If I remember reading that correctly in, I think it was A Difference Repetition, or maybe 1,000 Plateaus, but so the idea there is just simply that you can understand something mathematically without having to understand that things are distinct from each other, but there's a proximity or space between them, without having to kind of subordinate that distance to the metric units between those things. So in this case, you're not assuming that there's kind of, you know, little metric spaces that are, and that's what the distance would be, because those would just be, well, they're all the same thing, measured the same way. Instead, those distances are going to be more in a kind of an ordinal sense rather than a cardinal. So what the hell does that mean? So cardinal numbers, it's going to be like, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's all kind of the same thing. You got, you know, the same distance seemingly between one number and another, but they're all kind of oriented around the same thing. You know, 1 + 1 is 2, 2 - 1 is 1, blah, blah, blah. But in ordinal sequence, that's going to be something that you can't simply, it's not divisible in the same way as you would think of a normal metric space or some kind of your ordinary kind of cardinal numbers would be, in the sense that, okay, if I say there's something is first, something else is second, something else is third, those are all going to be kind of distinct in their own way without being equivalent, and that the first thing isn't exactly like the second, and the distinctions between them are not the same as the second and the third. So each thing is a singularity kind of its own. And so actually the idea of singularity, I think, is pretty that's pretty important, because okay, so in the mathematical ideas that they're using, so a singularity has to do with this point that determines how a function like a graph would be distributed. So this would be something like if you have a parabola and the parabola goes all the way up to, say it's like a negative, has like a negative on it, so it's like a downward facing one. So I got the peak right here. The singularity would be right at that peak. So that would be the point where it's changing direction. But that also, knowing that peak and that the gradient there of the singularity, that shows how it's distributed in all of its regular points. So those singularities, though, they always work in a kind of an ordinal sequence. So one singularity is always attached to this threshold that then takes it into another singularity, and that's kind of this idea of passing through all these states in this system. So that's, yeah, inflection point, which I think that's a specific kind. So I think there's a whole bunch of crazy kinds in the mathematics. I don't know. I looked at a few Wikipedia articles. Most of it just made absolutely no sense to me. It was looking at equations. I'm just like, what? I don't understand. But still, it's helpful to at least try to understand some aspects of the mathematics to get a sense of what's going on. So I think one thing that helps, so the idea of fluid dynamics, okay, imagine this, you just got a pool or something like that. Yes, sorry, Hunter. Although I would not say this, hard stuff like, okay, I interpret that first as stuff like hard math. That doesn't even make sense. Never mind, I just misread it. But okay, fluid dynamics. You got a pool or something, water, and say there's some kind of swirling effect going on there. So this would be, in mathematics, you would measure these all with vectors, which would be a point, and then you can determine kind of the direction that it typically goes, the water, the flow, based off of that vector. And then there's ways to kind of show the whole system how it has a kind of vector-like structure too. But the interesting thing about it is that, okay, it all kind of works together, this one thing of water, yet it still has these singularities within the water itself. So it's an example of this kind of multiplicity kind of thing going on, and these distributions of singular points and regular points. What is ordinary and what is distinctive? And then still you've got, so when you have some kind of fluid dynamic of some type, there's always going to be a kind of somewhat an influence over the whole system is moving in some way, but each point is not exactly like the other, and they're all unique in some sense. That's really what it means to be a kind of intensive system, is that these things are irreducibly different and distinct. So you can consider those these tensors because it's kind of like if you imagine the whole pool together, it's kind of has like a certain tension on different points. And those points that it goes through and crosses, I see it, that's what he's talking about with so the schizophrenic who says, or Nietzsche or whoever, and says, you know, I am all the names of history, I am all these races, I am all these people, I'm all these things. So all those so all of those would be something like this fluid dynamic moving through all these points, and that's why they use the idea of a circle and crossing through all these degrees. It's crossing through all the gradients of this system, and each gradient, each point is going to connect with some kind of, you know, dynamic singularity within the system. That's going to be this proper name of something. Okay, but specifically, you know, this whole idea of you know, why is it racial or whatnot? So this is kind of, I don't have a great grasp on this, but at least I'll say what I think is going on here. And this has to do with so I think one way to understand this is to look at what they're saying with the illegitimate use of this synthesis, which is connected to this idea of I am this, I identify as this, and that is different from you. So it's the us versus them kind of thing. I identify with some kind of molar subject, whatever. I'm the chosen people. I'm this, I'm that, as an exclusion. So I think, so what is the difference from that? Okay. I think what the schizo, this thing is doing is it's instead not identifying with those in some kind of fixed manner, but it's moving through all of those. And it's, the big thing is that it's passing through them as feelings that it just feels. It's not choosing to do these things as a kind of, you know, conscious identification process. Instead, there's a kind of, you know, naming that kind of goes along with it, but in a way it's kind of, oh my God, that was quite intense. I'll name it this, and it's coordinated with that. So I think what's moving through the schizo kind of effect is that it's moving through all those different identifications. It's kind of like recapitulating the history of all these identities and whatnot, made in the exclusive sense, but instead it's passing through all of them, but in kind of distinct ways. So at least that's the way I kind of understand that. And yeah, there's a lot of Bergsonian aspects to this, definitely, in the sense that, well, it's kind of complicated because Bergson, so he critiqued the idea of intensities, but I'm not quite sure exactly how that works. Okay, so wait, Joey, did you read the that article, the intensive order of schizophrenia or common sense one or whatever? Is that the one you read? No. So okay, that was the second one I posted, and so I noticed that actually there's something incorrect in it in the third footnote, which I don't know why I remember the number, but and it had to do with Bergson and intensities. They're saying that Deleuze gets the idea of intensities from Bergson, but that's not really accurate exactly. But okay, anyways, I should stop there. Oh wait, okay, wait, one more thing. Simulation. Okay, so the simulation thing, yeah, that's another one that is a little bit difficult. Okay, so I think really probably one of the best ways to understand that is the notion of intensity. Okay, so what does this even mean, intensity? So it's different from being extensity or extension, but that doesn't really tell you that much other than extensive quantities. Those are going to be equally divisible. So if I've got my bookmark here, you know, it's just, oh, I've got, wait, it's 6 inches. It's right there for me. Okay. Didn't even know that. Okay. So I've got my measurements here, metric. Okay, each one of these units, those are going to be the same exact as each one. They're equally divisible. So it's 6 inches divided by 2, 3. Each 3 is the same as the other one. Intensities, that's exactly what it doesn't do. So if I have, you know, a pot of water, temperature, and it's 100 degrees, if I divide the water in half, it's still 100 degrees. So it's not an extensive quantity, and that it's not divisible in this kind of simple way, the way that extensive quantities are. So that's kind of the negative way to see it, but really I think the more kind of philosophical way that Deleuze really draws on, and this is more explicit, and one thing that's, so he mentions this idea that, okay, we can't divide intensities without them changing in kind, or it's a qualitative, or not, it's a change in kind. Yeah, so this is that terminology is Bergsonian. That's from Bergson. He says, yeah, extensive quantities, you can divide them, but they're distinctions in degree, not in kind. Where this, so he says though that qualitative, Bergson says that qualitative multiplicities, those you can't divide without changing in kind. They will change qualitatively. But Deleuze does something a little different. So the thing about the structure of intensity that he finds interesting is that it's like a fractal, in the sense that, okay, you have one intensive whatever, it's composed of, it's coupled, where you have one element and then another, and then one is going to be different from the other one. But then this one that is different, if you look at that one, that itself will have the same structure, in that it will be composed of 2 properties, and one of those will be different. And then if you look at that one, it will have the same fractal structure, and one of those will be different. So it's this constant coupling of internal differences all the way down. And that's the idea of that there's kind of like, there's something that's implicated in it, because it implicates the whole system, but yet then there's going to also be this kind of extensive movement as well. Actually, that's beside the point, because that's really difference repetition stuff. But the idea is that for an intensity, it is difference in itself, because it can only be understood as this kind of coupling of different things. Inherently, it's a multiplicity of differences. So the same thing is going on here, I think, with this idea of this activity of kind of feeling this influx of the, well, I think what they eventually call like the germinal influx, which we'll get there. But so I feel some kind of intensity that's associated with some kind of name in history, the Joan of Arc effect, Heliogabalus, who I don't know who that is. I don't know who that is. I even looked it up and I still don't know who it is. So I don't know. Oh wait, I think Artaud does something about it, but whatever. I mean, if anyone actually knows, that'd be kind of interesting to know, because he references it a lot of stuff. But anyways, so one thing is because really it's kind of supported by these differences, these intensive differences. And that is also kind of what's going on with this idea of kind of like these complexes of forces that Nev was talking about, but you have one kind of dominant force that kind of seems to take over and says, it's me. I think that's kind of what that aspect of whoever kind of gets on top and wins and says, that's me. That's really this act of kind of disguise or simulation. And that's going to be something that's constitutive of a complex, in the same way that these forces, these complex of forces, they need something like a dominant drive. The same way that, whichever way that Hunter's going to interpret the asshole texting him about Zizek or whatever, that force, that's going to be this kind of dominant force. That's kind of this intensity that could be associated with, you could even give a name to them, like the force that's like, oh wait, this guy might be right. You could name that force to some person in history, and then the person who's just like, what? Who's this guy? Fuck this guy. Give a name to someone else for that force too, that intensity. So, but the point is that though that you really need at least one kind of singular tension, one kind of singular state to pass through, and that's what really wins. But it wins by simulating. Ultimately, it's simulating something. It's not really that identity, because it's just simply passing through it, and it's inherently a difference and a multiplicity, anyways. So it's always going to be feigning some kind of I'm the whole thing, but really it's not that way. That's the way I at least see it. But okay, so it's not like Baudrillard's idea of simulation. So Deleuze even talks about like simulacra and stuff like that, particularly in difference repetition, which the idea is that, okay, it's a copy that loses its reference to what it copied. It has no original. There's no original term. It's a copy that's lost all of its reference to any kind of an original. So what does that mean? It's singular. So it can pretend to be anything. The sophist. So this is Plato. So the term comes from Plato, a simulacrum, and Plato uses it in the sophist to say, okay, this is, he's always trying to figure out, what is the genuine thing that participates in the form. You've got wisdom. Okay, who participates in it? Oh wait, the philosopher king does that. Okay, that's the legitimate claimant of this form. But then you've also got these pretenders. You can have whatever, all the people that Plato doesn't like, which is just about everybody except people that are just like him, it seems like. Strange, huh? Yeah. But then okay, so you've got a simulacrum, and that's going to be, this copy without an original, which he thinks, okay, so Plato says, this is like a sophist that can go and be just like Socrates, to the point where you can't even tell the difference between Socrates and a sophist, but only one of them really is wise. Only one of them really has this aspect of, and that's what Plato fears above all, is this idea that these simulacra could just be like unleashed into the world, and no one would be able to tell the difference between the true claimant of the forms and those who are just simply simulating them. But Deleuze likes this idea. So
okay, I have a question then. I have a question. Would it be possible then, in a sort of, Philistine attempt to translate it to my I just read the chat and I kind of guffawed.
Asclepius.
Yeah. If I had a sort of, like I said, a sort of Philistine attempt to try and make.
I'm sorry, I meant
know.
rooster. It's not.
It's
Whatever.
Yeah, that's okay.
I don't know what else you'd be referencing. So
yeah, So a simulation as a copy without an original is Baudrillard, not D&G, right? Well, okay. So simulations within the all right. Again, I'm gonna try to draw this line of distinction. But what I understand. On one side, and this is because I love biunivocal distinctions of either or, period. That's it. Only the two. It's either. So on one side, basically, you have the psychoanalytic notion of the subject, not the ego necessarily, but let's say this, if I can just indulge my interpretation of Lacan to its most extreme, a non dash, like a non thing, non whatever, non, just a no that doesn't fit any symbol, that doesn't fit or align with or fit into the contours of any symbol. This is the basic thrust of castration. Symbolic castration is the subject as a no, as a pure no, a negative that doesn't fit any symbol. Okay. Then on this other side, again, of this either or period, is this Deleuzian conception of the subject, not necessarily the ego, because I guess the ego is just this whatever we would call the ego, or the self-identical sense or intensity, would be the force that wins out, right? But the subject is this amalgam of forces in competition for a name, in simulation, as the only outlet of that intensity or that force. Meaning, to clarify, an amalgam of forces wherein, let's say I'm Tarzan and I'm a jungle boy and I don't know anything about, whatever, and my intensities think I have a gorilla mother, and I'm not gonna. No, never mind. I'm playing too much into the stereotype of the psychoanalytic always talking about mommy, daddy. Okay, but let's talk about, maybe I'm a snake. Maybe I'm not a gorilla. Maybe I should just lay down and die.
Maybe you have a gorilla uncle.
Sure, a gorilla, and I'm a gorilla nephew, I guess. There's this in this Tarzan reality of myself, in this Tarzan person, this feral child. Because those have happened. In a feral child, there's this amalgam of forces contending. I don't know why they contend, but they're contending in what could be called simulation, in the sense that those forces basically, like Husserl's conception of consciousness as a flashlight that points at things. It will think, maybe I'm this thing that's in front of me. Maybe I'm related to this thing that's in front of me. Maybe I'm connected to this thing that's in front of me. Some part of what I know, or what I experience, or what is my surroundings, or my world, my symbolic life world, or my life world in general, some part of these parts of my life world, they are what I'm drawing from. They are what gives the color. I'm using these words hesitantly, but give the color to these forces These forces in me are colored in a sense by my surroundings, as in, am I a snake? Am I a gorilla? Am I actually a plant, perhaps? Because I don't quite relate to any of them, you know, and whichever one sticks for the day, or whatever, right? And then if I'm a person in Western Protestant civilized center of capital society, am I a banker, or am I a banker, a baker, a candlestick maker? You know, am I this, that, or the other? What am I among these other terms that are in my symbolic life world, or life world in general? And that's where so simulation is this, to me, and I don't know if this is the case, but so again, to redraw just to ask if this I don't know, makes sense, or if this is right. On one hand, you have the subject as this no, this does not fit any symbol. It is purely a no. It is a none. And then on the other side, you have the subject basically as this effect, this residual, this residual effect of an amalgam of forces that are in competition, that are colored or determined in some way by the culture and history in which the facticity is placed, like in a jungle or in Britain or whatever. An amalgam, the effect of an amalgam of simulating forces, you know, pantomiming what it sees, versus a pure no that says I want to be one of those forces because it'd be so easy, but I am not, and I never will be. And both end in this similar place where it's like, we're never actually going to be like this, whatever identity comes forward as the strongest one, whatever, well, that's Nevitt, what I was saying about, Nevitt just asked in the chat, just for clarification, what does it mean to say that the forces are simulating? When I say, I'm thinking, and this is a guess, this is just a shot, I'm throwing a dart at a board with my eyes closed. I think it's that they are, that the simulation part, the simulation comes from the fact that it draws from the outside and draws external material in and takes that kind of for its own, as its own basis for itself. Like I said, like in a jungle, if I was born in a jungle, it'd be snakes and gorillas and zebras and whatever. The zebras aren't in jungles, I'm stupid. Or if I'm in, like I said, like Victorian England, I'd be like, do I make matches, or am I a banker or a clerk or a whatever? Am I what these different things around me? It's simulating. This is a guess again. This is just a guess. This is an educated guess. It's simulating because it takes stuff from its external environment as these points of reference that it can fabricate these forces, or these forces can feel empowered. Like you know, like a dominating force does not just, or like the full rainbow of forces that Nietzsche describes do not just necessarily come about within the human subject as some sort of, we have a sort of physiological destiny to have all these forces in us. They're in a way culturally or historically determined. So I don't know. I mean, is that so? Okay, those are the two. So yeah, what are we thinking? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't. I hadn't thought in things. I would like. So, my short answer is I don't know. So I'd be interested in whatever Chase has to say.
Is the factor of induction play a big role here, because they keep saying induction and not organizers? So is that playing a role in what they are saying is a way to identify the effects of the stimuli? Like, it doesn't matter that whatever social simulation that we're in, whatever point of extreme, we're looking at the effects, or what they call the induction, rather than theoretical organizers. Is that what we're focusing on, or what they're trying to focus on?
Okay, so that part, I probably, maybe Joseph, maybe you can just remind me of it, but so that part, has to do with kind of with more specifically their critique of Oedipus, in the sense that, especially this kind of logic of, the first term in the series, what happens at the beginning, that determines the whole, everything after that. You can have like this one, like the Wolf Man, the Freud's famous case. He saw his parents having sex, doggy style, by the way, and that's had this like primary just trauma that then had to be, that starts this new series, and it goes from there. It's determined just from that. So what their critique of that seems to be is that now these first terms in a series, they, first of all, there is no real first term in a series, because even your original first term itself is going to be referencing some other series. So there is no real first term. But then, even then, there's a kind of distance between these where it's somewhat indifferent to specifically the content and how the series is then later organized. Or there's going to be, so I think the big thing is, okay, he's saying there isn't necessarily some kind of, well, so the reference to embryos, I think is significant, and at least that's actually probably the way I understand it. So, and Deleuze goes into more detail about this in Difference Repetition, but the idea with the embryos is that, so you can take a little embryo, a cute little baby, God bless them, can't kill them anymore, I guess, unfortunately. Actually, I'm not going to say it. Never mind. Okay, so you got these embryos,
you can.
Babies, and
being recorded.
Yeah, I was going to get into some Bataille kind of sacrificial stuff.
Hey,
but,
yeah, it leads into the next section.
Yeah, and
Wise Solomon. Damn it.
Okay, so you've got embryo. Okay, focus chase. All right, you get embryo. You can do these experiments with grafting where you can take one part of an embryo and kind of then section it onto another part that is distinct, and it'll kind of grow back into, it'll mold to its surrounding, I guess, of where it is. So there's nothing, and this will happen after there's already kind of these primary determinations like cells dividing. These things happen, these kind of things structured by genetics on this one level. But then there's kind of these additional differentiations, and those are going to be not determined by the same thing. So in Difference Repetition, he says that so there's kind of like these differential relations that are virtual, and that's kind of these original kind of differentiations that correspond to certain things. But then there's also these kind of intensive individuation, and there's going to be a distinction there between those. And that distinction is also kind of what he says is that this is why genetic determinism never works. Exactly. Because, it still obviously is true to a certain extent, but only to a certain extent. Why is it not absolute, genetic determinism? It's because there's still other processes that determine, how this organism ultimately ends up as this or that are not determined just by this one level. There's still other aspects, and that's going to have to do with these kind of this process of individuation, which he associates with embryos and whatnot. So you've got one aspect of this embryo, something happens to it. It doesn't determine exactly what happens to it. It's more constantly, it's got this plasticity, this kind of elasticity, where it can, what happens to it at one time doesn't determine what it's going to turn into. So if I stab some part of it, it can grow back, whatever. That's a terrible example, but that's one aspect. So specifically, with these inducers and organizers, I think the idea is that simply, you could have some kind of an induction, something, but that doesn't organize kind of the whole series all the way down forever and ever. That you can have these effects, but they can kind of, it's ultimately, it's kind of saying this hard determinism is not, it doesn't really work that way, because there's kind of multiple different forces and levels kind of going on. It's not kind of just one straight thing. I don't know if that helped at all. But I think that's kind of what he's going into with at least the inductor kind of thing. But okay, there's something else though. I'm gonna try not to talk too long, but okay, there's something, Nevit, you said in the chat, you're asking about Baudrillard's idea of simulation. Okay, so
it sounded to me like you were just, maybe I'm wrong. I thought when you made that comment, you were describing Baudrillard's view, but not that you were saying that Deleuze and Guattari were different. Their notion of simulation was different from that. Is that correct?
It is. So yeah, D and G, they have a different idea of a simulacrum than Baudrillard, although they're not really that different, but they are different. Okay, so Baudrillard, he thinks that this is kind of okay, they both share the idea that a simulacrum is a copy that's lost its original, its referent. But Baudrillard thinks this is actual historical process that occurred with the rise of specific technologies like information technology, media technology, technologies that could reproduce things. That's what's caused a kind of originally, you had, the real, and now the real's gone. Thanks capitalism, that's basically Baudrillard. And it's kind of like Lacan, there's this idea of the real is gone, or it's an impossible real. You can't get access to it now. We're just kind of stuck in these chains of signifiers, but ultimately, where's the referent to all these signifiers? There is none anymore. It's dead. It's gone. Just forget about it. That's Baudrillard. So Deleuze, he says, there's no original to these copies, but it's more of a metaphysical thing. It's not a historical process. That's the biggest thing. And also, it's not that simulation that's this divorce from the real. Instead, that's just part of the process of reality. That's what reality is: difference or repetition, and that's the creation of these simulacrum. And so that's the big difference.
I'm still wondering, so Hunter proposed that the simulation was, and I'm not sure, I may not be repeating this correctly, but the simulation was because these internal processes were drawing on external environment, and in order to mimic something there, whereas I thought the simulation was more an internal process, like that you were describing earlier about these different forces kind of overcoming one another, so that were masking each other in some way. But to be honest,
Mhm.
like I said in the chat, I hadn't really thought that much about how external forces interact with these internal processes. So
Yeah,
Hunter's thesis is an interesting one. I just don't know.
I think they definitely have to be involved. So I agree with Hunter in that sense that honestly I'm not totally sure exactly what so there obviously has to be some kind of influence from even just like basic empirical stuff going on around me, what my gorilla uncle or whatever, you know that those have an influence in kind of what these intensities are, which ones which ones are simulated. So one of the examples in here was about Louis the 17th. Yeah, it's 17th. Okay. And so actually I ended up looking this up and reading a little bit about it, these pretenders. And I think I saw a movie about it when I was a kid or something. Or maybe this is kind of one of these like Proustian moments where I had this recollection of something, but it was a pure past. It was never actually it was in a past present. It was a pure past. It was this involuntary reminiscence. But so okay, where was I? Okay, yeah, these simulacrum coming from the outside and whatnot, and Louis the 17th. So these people, they're talking about, they would kind of say, okay, I'm Louis the 17th, or I at least lay claim to this person, Louis the 17th. I lay claim to this, and then, but they would themselves kind of be implicated in all the other pretenders too. So they would also claim to say something like, okay, well, I'm Louis the 17th, but I'm also this other guy who's claiming to be Louis the 17th. And I'm also the other guy down the hallway that's also claiming the same thing. And I'm also Louis the 17th's father and mother and sister and nurse and everything else. So, obviously there's something going on there with, they're specifically catering to what's going on in their time. Louis the 17th, he was in prison, got the whole French Revolution thing, and then he probably died, but did he really die? I don't know. Maybe he's still out there. Who could be him? I don't know. Maybe I'm him. Actually, I am Louis the 17th. But yeah, so I think it's definitely reacting. It has some kind of influence, definitely, with this kind of external social reality going on. So he's saying, they're both saying specifically that the content of this is social, it's racial, it's historical, and I think so. It's drawing on history, but it's also drawing on kind of these present moment times as well. It's all of history, really. I'm the names of all of history. So I think if you kind of see it as, okay, it's the whole pool is there, but you've got really kind of a specific tension within the pool based off these fluid dynamics. And I think the way that works, you still have some kind of access, I think, ultimately to the whole circle, even if you can only kind of, in a really intensive way, feel just one of them at a time. But I think something, another thing, I think, so you think of in the sense of the way that children kind of do this as a game, where they'll kind of be different people, not in a way where they actually believe it though. Okay, one example, one of my friends, he told me that for a long time, he basically believed to a certain extent that he was Peter Pan, but he didn't really actually believe it. So what's going on there? He understood it in some sense that he was not really actually Peter Pan, but yet he thought he was Peter Pan. And his grandma was afraid that he would jump out of his window thinking that he could fly, which, yeah, don't jump out. You can't fly. If you can fly, take off from the ground. That's my advice. If you're jumping out of windows, you can't fly. Otherwise, why do you need the window? So yeah. So I think this also occurs with kids with all kinds of things where they'll be like, I'm Spider-Man. They don't really believe that they're Spider-Man, but that's the best way that they can kind of have some kind of intensity kind of well up to them, and they identify, at least have this simulation, this play of saying this name of I'm Spider-Man. I don't know, maybe you can do some kind of like add in some a kind of Lacanian thing where, okay, it's taking in, images from this outside and identifying with them. I mean, of course, they say that this is not a kind of imaginary thing going on, but or it's not mediated through images, I think is kind of the big thing, where they're saying those are somewhat different. Instead, it's operating through a sort of a different medium, but it's still, I think, similar to the Lacanian notion in the sense that it's definitely kind of capturing these codes from outside, but the outside is itself kind of this social, historical kind of intensity that's already inherent in all of us, I think. I'm not sure exactly how that's, it sounds almost kind of Jungian sort of, and I don't think they want to make that claim, but I'm not sure how else to explain it. So there you go.
I made the comment in the chat. I got the impression that they think of the unconscious not just as like my unconscious and your unconscious, but that there's kind of like a corporate unconscious or something of that sort. I was wondering, like when they were talking about the body without organs, and people are drawing from these intensities on the body. Is that my unconscious, or is that actually like the socius, or this sort of body without organs that has this corporate character? And that's starting to sound a little bit like Jung, but it doesn't have to be exactly like Jung. But I'm wondering, is that the case? Because if that's true, if this unconscious, if there's a sort of corporate or social unconscious, then that would also support Hunter's notion that my identity is not drawn merely from these encapsulated forces, but they're actually drawing from these social constructs.
Yeah, I think it's almost that there is a kind of something to, I think maybe the whole way that it's being framed by a kind of like internal external is probably not what they would want to say, but just to go along with it, I would say that, okay, yeah, there's some kind of internal thing, but the internal thing itself is a kind of fold from the outside. And that's even the way that Deleuze will describe subjectivity kind of in some of his later books, mainly drawing on Foucault, but also with the whole idea of the fold. There's kind of some Merleau-Ponty and Heidegger and Leibniz especially going on there, but the idea is that, yeah, you could have how do you create, the inside, get my, what is this? Oh, this is when I had my last inspection 2.5 years ago. Yes, correct. It's 2.5 years overdue. Okay, got this outside forces, but oh, look at that. I've got, some kind of inner thing going on here. So that is going to be kind of like, now we've got this singularity, but it's composed still of these outside forces. So that's where I think that's probably the best way to explain it, at least in those terms of, is there an inside or outside? I think ultimately they kind of want to say that it's kind of a both and neither kind of thing, or those aren't really the best ways of thinking about it. They would probably want to do something like that. At least, yeah, that's my guess.
Yeah, I also posted something about, my sense of Nietzsche is that everything's will to power, and, individual things are just like concentrated, structured forms of will to power, which means there's no sharp distinction between the inside and the outside, again, because whatever the forces are that constitute me are really actually just a kind of, I think of them as kind of a knot. I have a hard time not thinking about this as sort of these Buddhist terms like the net of Indra and things of that sort. But the forces that constitute me are kind of a knot of forces that in the general fabric of forces. So to say that this is an individual is somewhat artificial, because all those forces really are, like I said, the general, and they all go, they all go on for infinity. Like I am a knot of forces, and all of these forces, like a field, like an electric field or gravitational field, they all tail out to infinity and just become less and less influential on this particular knot. But everything ultimately is connected to everything, which isn't exactly the same thing as you were talking about with the fold. But I guess I can see why you're saying you don't want to be reductive about this inside outside, because there's no real clear distinction there.
Well, the other thing too that I find interesting in this conversation as well is that on page 94, like Hunter brought up being raised by apes, right? Like what I was thinking was on at the bottom of page 94, once it has been said that it is no longer a matter of reforming cadres of familiar and social adaptation of integration, but rather of instituting original forms of active groups, the question arises as to what extent these core groups resemble artificial families, which I find very interesting that he called them artificial families, and to what extent they lend themselves to Oedipization. So like for them, I'm wondering to kind of go further back on a little down the line on page 98, yes, the family is a stimulus, but a stimulus that is quantitatively indifferent, an inductor that is neither an organizer nor a disorganizer. As for the response, it always comes from another direction. If there is indeed language, it is on the side of the response, not the stimulus. And even further down in 99, in this conception, the metaphysical and social relations arise afterwards in the matter of a beyond. So I'm wondering if what they're saying is if we have this tendency to confuse causality with logic and looking for this original function of the family unit and Oedipization. So like there is not logic in that. It's just reverting to this state of being that has occurred afterwards. So like instead of having like Hunter be the bug gatherer, me and the ape family being, the person that pulls off the tree gatherer, or the bark off the tree looking for the bug, instead of having this artificial family of social production, if we're focusing more on the stimuli, thinking that again, causality and this theoretical structure of Freud's concept of the familiar unit is present, then it kind of leads to us not creating from a Nietzschean standpoint, but just merely folding back into a pre-existing theory, so to speak, so that we need to focus more on the stimuli and the effects in these artificial family groups that have been created. It's not the family groups that are kind of like a mold that fits us into from a metaphysical or a theoretical perspective that we can make sense of things. It's what we take or assimilate from that stimuli in that environment and create out of it, which is in a constant state of flux. So are they saying that it's less about looking for the origin and more about looking at the effect and whether or not that effect is falling into one of these kind of like children's toys of psychoanalysis. Does this square fit this round peg or hole?
Yeah. Oh, I was just gonna, yeah, to make it way harder for Chase to speak next. I'm just, because I think that's funny to me. No, I just, I wanted to say briefly that this, I just wanted to point out this thing that I'm seeing, that if there is a language, it's in the response, right? This seems to be like a basic. I'm always trying to find these, these splits, these basic points of like, okay, where can we actually delineate between like Deleuze and Guattari's project of schizoanalysis and the more traditional project of psychoanalysis. I'm always trying to find those. And just to point out just to everybody, I think a place that we could point to it is right there in that statement, language is in the response. Because I mean, Lacan is pretty explicit that that language, that symbols, abstraction, if I could call it that, have a logical and ontological primacy. And any attempt by the way, I just want to say, Eric said that you've grasped just as a brief aside, you'll know you've grasped schizoanalysis when you see sun rays come out of your ass. Listen, there's a movie called Himiko where a lady, in the very first couple minutes of that movie, she has sex with like sunbeams. And it was like Judge Schreiber happening in like ancient Japan with like the shaman thing. I was like, whoa, and whatever. Everybody needs to watch that. Moving on. It's just, that's it. Moving on. The thing is, so Deleuze and Guattari's schizoanalytic project is concerned with, and this comes up in a lot of different ways, subject as effect, residual effect, blah blah blah, as the effect of a process. What are we really dealing with? Not the familialist question of where did it come from. I guess I came out of my mom's lower half. Does that matter? A bicycle horn might as well have, I don't know. Am I so doomed to be obsessed with the hole that I was disseminated out of that I can't focus on what's in front of me? Because I'm starting to feel kind of, ready to focus on what's in front of me. I'm less interested in whatever I was sprayed out of, or whatever. I'm less interested in that. I totally get that. I totally relate to this project of looking at the effect and looking at the result, at this language as the response. But I'm just saying, and this is not me, I'm just saying, Lacan seems to be much more interested in this in what has primacy, what goes first, how do we go first, how do we begin to think? We have to think the beginning of thought, all that stuff. And he starts with language and symbols and signifiers, and argues that anything signified, any sort of stimulus, like we were talking about these stimulus or these inducers, we can only approach them through signifiers. Constantly this primacy of abstraction. Zizek has a chapter in his book Sex and the Failed Absolute called The Persistence of Abstraction, just about this persistent, constant, pervasive problem of abstraction. And I mean, maybe Zizek's analysis is kind of reductive, but that phenomenon of believing, let me say, what is it, like believing that I'm Peter Pan, but knowing nonetheless that I'm not really Peter Pan, but believing otherwise, or whatever. Zizek is pretty quick to say that's just fetishistic denial. That's just fetishistic. That's just a basic exercise in fetishistic denial. This sort of retransmission of a symbol or a signifier, meaning like my wife is dead, but and I know this, but I choose nonetheless to live as though it is not the case. I can nonetheless not bring myself to believe it. And this gives rise to, in Lacan and in Zizek, this gives rise to this powerful force that was actually talked about by, what was that one guy's name who I don't like? Dawkins. Okay, so Dawkins talks about yeah, I agree. Let's not have it, whatever. I'm going to move on. I'm not going to just change the topic to everybody going like, yeah, fuck that guy. Because we could pretty quickly. But one thing he talked about that was really cool was memes. And he describes memes as these, like a thought contagion that has its own proliferation already programmed into itself. And I think that this plays a really big part in Lacan's notion of these signifiers, and how they are the external or whatever. We talk about, the split between the internal and the external. I agree. I don't think that in Deleuze and Guattari there is this this solid split between the internal and external, and it's all this kind of, and I think everybody that we're talking about here, Zizek, Lacan, Deleuze and Guattari, they all agree that which is of depth is deceitful in a sense. Depth, the notion of depth is just a complication of surface. And this is just, I don't know, like if we need to trying to retread some basic ground. I think everybody that we're talking about in this sort of psychoanalytic 20th century thinker camp, they're all kind of on this vibe that's like surfaces, topology, the top level, this structure that is outlaid on a surface, on a plane, you know what I mean? And depth is just in a way a complication of a surface, right? So moving on from that, these ideas, these external things that we, logic of sense being all about surfaces. Okay, case in point. But like these external things that we derive our personality or that we simulate or whatever. I think that, like I said, Lacan and Zizek would probably be like really committed to just saying like, it's just a symbol. It's just a symbol and you're caught in symbols. You're caught forever in this web of symbols, signs, signifiers. And those things that seem to operate on their own, the real beneficial or non-beneficial or attractive or repulsive effects of a thing are an idea spreading, even if in the long term it brings only destruction to its bearers and its experience is unattractive. It's this this thing that has its own reproduction kind of programmed into it, but nonetheless it is a signifier. And so I'm every once in a while I feel like I'm jumping in to like recapitulate this lack of substantial content of the subject for Lacan, this real emptiness for Lacan, nothingness, abyssal circularity of subjectivity, an abyss, like a nothing, a no, le non. But I think that it seems like Deleuze and Guattari are in incorporating this notion of effect, aftermath, whatever. I think it would be very hard for them to maintain such a purely signifier-oriented linguistic approach to reality and to the world. And so they don't, because they think that's wrong. It's wrong to do. It's wrong to be purely focused in abstraction, to be solely oriented around abstraction, But that's just a qualifier, this split that I was even thinking about when they talk about things like the family as the microcosm, primordial repression, libidinal investments as being pre-ideological or non-ideological. This split that I'm talking about between pure abstraction and the notion of abstraction not really meaning a whole lot anymore for Deleuze and Guattari, right? I think this is at the heart of a lot of questions that I think can be asked about, like these libidinal investments versus their ideological content or their ideological character. primordial repression, and organizers in the realm of the induced rather than in the inducer, and whatever, right? Excuse me, it's a lot more clear cut for people like Lacan. So excuse me, that's just a thing I do, but it's a clear cut for people like Lacan, and that's attractive about his theories for me. But it's a little bit more complicated and a little bit more caught in this sort of web. Pure abstraction meaning language has primacy, like any sort of attempt to talk about the non-linguistic material realm is only possible through signifiers. We're caught in abstractions, in language, in symbols, in like, and I think Lacan takes that very seriously and is very concerned with the fact that the only way to get to the signified or reality or the like the hard stuff that I'm sitting on right now and like the meat that my body is made of that I can pull off of myself if I try hard enough, those things are only approachable to me in this sense through this series of signifiers. And the attempt to yeah, and in the attempt to talk about those things is only possible through a triangulation through signifiers. It's always signifier comes first, language comes first. It's not about your body, it's not about physical reality, it's not about the effect of signifiers, it is signifiers come first, first and foremost, for Lacan. And to the degree that he says the unconscious is just the effect of language. It's not like a thing we have, it's just the effect of language on a subject. And a subject is just I think Lacan is dangerously close to like a Descartesian perspective on subject, if I'm being completely honest, like a Cartesian punctual point of reference cogito, like an empty, contentless punctual point of reference on a Cartesian plane, like in differential calculus, like this amalgam of nothingness that adds up to something somehow when you calculate the volume of a space through differential calculus. Or you have two points on a plane, and those 2 points have no size or no extension. They're just this punctual point of zero, of nothing, weirdly, but still something. And that still somethingness, that's what Lacan sees as like the person, the subject. I mean, ultimately, Lacan's kind of pessimistic and says, yeah, and by the way, this means that we're kind of fucked. We're caught here in symbols, and we're always going to be. We can make them nicer, but that's it. And then Zizek comes in and tries to bring Hegel and make it all radical and revolutionary, blah, 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 but that's not what's at stake here. Okay, so sorry. That's just recapitulating that point. And I'm interested in, what Chase has to say, not about sunbeams necessarily, but about about Eric's point on Spinoza's panpsychism. I was really interested in, and Aiden's talking about the feeling and ideas of Spider-Man. I'm really interested in those 2 points. But yeah, sorry to derail, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyways, I think you're right, Hunter, about that there's that split. And I think that is definitely one of the most significant things, it seems like, is that whole notion of language where, this part I don't really understand about Lacan, which I think is a way. So I've never read Lacan kind of as primary text other than in quotes and things. I think this is somewhat of a defense mechanism. So I can just continuously be like, I don't know about Lacan, because if I suddenly have to deal with it, then I'm suddenly responsible. Suddenly the judgment of God is, upon me. And that's always when I'm trying to escape. But anyways, I think that is probably one of the key points there. And I'll be honest, Deleuze and Guattari's ideas about language in semiotics are still a little hazy to me as well. But anyways, so yeah, the Spinoza panpsychism, I think that is a really good way of seeing it. although it's kind of okay. Wait, I just got distracted by Nevin's message. Hold on. I'm just gonna read out loud. Hunter has read Lacan. Do you really want to have the kind of consciousness that reading Lacan produces? No, I don't. Yeah, I really don't. No. So
did you read Deleuze though? I mean, you're already so far down the rabbit hole. You should be fine with Lacan.
Okay, well, I don't know if I want to really bring this up because it's almost too serious in a sense, but it's kind of okay. I think I associate Lacan with something of a. Don't take this too seriously, Hunter. I don't know. Just a kind of like a sort of like a like it's metaphysically a negative viewpoint, but also kind of in the conventional sense of like it's just too. I don't know. It seems too kind of like defeatist to me in a certain sense, where it's kind of like, oh, I can't do anything, you know, failure and lack and negativity and nothing, and it's kind of, I one sense I kind of jive with that, but then there's another aspect of like, I don't know, I need something. I want like intensities and like violence and just like metamorphosis and transmutation and like turning inside out and becoming animal and schizophrenia. Like that's, I don't know, that's just, I like this kind of Nietzschean realm of like, you know, just kind of, you're a certain way to a certain extent, you just kind of like certain things, kind of got this typology. That's kind of like my typology. I'm just kind of like, I like Deleuzian kind of stuff, and I don't know. I still kind of, honestly, I'm still interested in Lacan and also that kind of this idea of kind of trying to figure out, you know, negativity and all these things. And actually, there's one semester I wrote 3 papers on the idea of nothingness in one semester. But anyways, I'm still legitimately interested in Lacan. I would like to eventually read him for real, but I think probably after my thesis is done, which God knows when that will be done. I haven't done shit recently, but anyways, I'm sorry, you guys have to hear me rant about this stupid shit. Yeah, anyways. Okay. So where was I?
Be turning inside out into an animal.
Yes. That is a little more 1,000 plateaus, but they definitely are talking about becoming in here, but it's not so much a kind of formalized thing. Yes, panpsychism and Spinoza. Okay, I just want to say though, real quick.
What is an edgelord? I'm sorry, I should have muted.
1,000 plateaus. I like 1,000 plateaus better than Anti-Oedipus. I'll just say that. It's a better book. Although I don't want to discourage people from reading this, but whatever. If you made it this far, then you're already, you know, like Joseph was saying, you're already gone. Like you're already too far down. I mean, you might as well just read whatever. Read Lacan, read 1,000 Plateaus, read Logic of Sense, read Zizek, whatever. I don't know. Jordan Peterson, Marx, Klosowski. I really want to read this, especially because I paid $35 for it. It's probably the most I've spent on a book in a long time. But I've heard it's almost like a horror novel. So I realize I'm totally not getting. Yeah, my point is it's very very much I can't think of the word. I'm moving in circles to get there, whatever. Okay.
Yes, but your circles are oscillating between a point which is a flux of induction that may actually produce a social synthesis with us, which is an artificial family. So maybe we should elaborate on that, on what the Oedipal quest here is. Jackson.
Well said. All right. So I keep wanting to like say something else to kind of lead into this, and the chat keeps distracting me. Like the idea of, okay, Chase is masking up pointlessness. So I had a argument earlier today with someone who's very contrarian, and said something about that would defeat the purpose of meditation. And I said, in Zen, there is no purpose to meditation other than the meditation itself. Meditation is its own purpose. And that was, instead I was greeted with screenshots from Google of Googling meditation, Zen meditation purpose, and then like highlighting specific things in it to show that I was wrong. But anyways, which is ridiculous. I don't know. It's purposelessness. I don't know. Isn't that the idea in Zen? Isn't that it? Like meditation, zazen. You don't do it for a reason. You don't do it to or get better at something. You just do it to do it. Okay. I'm sorry. Spinoza, panpsychism, all this stuff. Okay, so the subject, you know, is this kind of residuum of all these intensities, of all these three syntheses and all this stuff. I think in a lot of ways you can see this is that, yeah, for everything that happens in this very broad sense of happening, that has something that ends in a process where you have something like a consciousness, or at least some kind of experience with it. And I think the way that that is connected always with some kind of process connected with experience or consciousness or whatever, that is also something like what is going on with what they're saying about how all these different things have these little subjects connected with them. So it's almost like there's a constituent of subjectivity that kind of is parallel and goes along with all the unconscious productive aspects. And that's a big key to kind of what's going on, I think, with their notion of subjectivity, but also the way that it has this kind of the strange characteristics, you know, of all these people from throughout history, blah, blah, blah. It's because every intensive feeling kind of has this kind of corresponding idea of experience to go along with it. But then that also is connected with some kind of this, I can't remember how they refer to it. So they talk about it in the third chapter, this kind of notion of races and ethnicity and kind of this, I don't know, like a tribal identity of people.
Yeah, like where he says like you need to have a Chinaman or a black man available once there's some type of white neurosis. I have that underlined.
Oh, I think I know you're referring to. Oh wait,
page 98. There's no signifying chain without a Chinaman, an Arab, and a black who drop into trouble the night of a white paranoiac.
Oh yeah, so they're. Well, I mean, okay, so they're. I think we should maybe talk about their writing style for a little bit, in the sense that they're kind of. This is a polemic book. It's kind of, I mean, it's funny. They're trying to be funny in some cases. So it's not necessarily like, well, like Spinoza's ethics to a certain degree. We're like doing something like geometric method, where it's kind of like one proposition moves to the other, blah, blah, blah. And I think there's like that is a case where, yeah, they're almost trying to give you an intensive affect to go along with that, to kind of get their point across. And I think if it's considered just purely as, you know, content of ideas, that kind of sometimes definitely misses the point. I think it has to be understood as a kind of performative effect to a certain degree. So because I think in that case, they're not saying literally that that's the case, that, you know, for every, what was it? I can't remember the specific things about it, but that you have to have, the idea is you have some kind of racial multiplicity, some kind of racial confrontation, something like this, or these battles of forces, you know, we're talking about, but the specifically they have some kind of racial component to it. I think that's based their point there. So they're not literally saying, yeah, it has to have, you know, one of these or the other, you know. So, okay, Spinoza thing also is, so there's this idea of parallelism, which Spinoza didn't come up with that. Leibniz came with that, the name at least. But the idea is that, okay, you've got substance, which, so I guess I should point this out. So on page 327, they say that the body without organs is Spinoza's substance, and that partial objects are like the attributes. And then they've kind of got this whole correspondence or a parallelism with Spinoza. But yeah. And so I think that's a good way of seeing exactly how that works. Okay, so what is parallel in Spinoza? It's the attributes, which are extension and thought, and also those attributes. So what are they in terms of substance? The attributes express substance. So substance is the cause of itself. It's, you know, auto production. It's also this infinite power of production, but it's individual powers which have to be infinite, because substance is itself infinite power. It has these distinctions of attributes, but they're not real distinctions, they're formal distinctions. And this is very important, this kind of distinction, that it's not a numerical distinction, like 1, 2. Substance isn't 1, or it's not 2. It's outside of these numbers. It's non-numerable. But the attributes, these are formally distinct. And with that, you can get multiplicity of all these different elements. Although for some reason we only know 2 of them, which I've always thought that was a pretty weak point on Spinoza's part, that there's an infinite amounts of attributes, but we only know 2, like thought and extension. Like, come on, Spinoza. Like, it's got to be like, we got to know like 4 or 5 or something, you know, whatever. But yeah, I think so. If we understand substance as the body without organs, and then these partial objects, these kind of connections, these syntheses going on as powers of attributes, and then what happens with that, these attributes, they have to express themselves then further through modes, but modes of themselves are just modifications of substance. The idea, though, is that this is all kind of one immanent process, where what is, it has this kind of reciprocal effect where substance is what it is. It's this power of existing, this power of producing itself, but it can only produce itself and exist through its modes, through its modifications. So it's inherently a modification of itself. That's what it is. Substance is this way of expressing its power that is also a self-modification. And that's basically Deleuze's idea of Spinoza. So where does, though, this parallelism is between these different attributes, which don't causally interact with each other, but you still have any mode will have both. So a mode will kind of go along with both of these attributes because it has a kind of identity with substance, though it's also distinct at the same time. Maybe that sounds like contradiction, but not for Spinoza.
Would a mode be like a form of intensity?
Yes, exactly. So this is actually the most controversial part of Deleuze's reading of Spinoza, is that he says that attributes are their intensities, basically. They're qualities for Spinoza, but they also have some kind of quantity to go with them. And so the thing is, it's kind of this riddle of that there's an attribute, it's expressed in modes, and the modes are a quantitative distinction of attributes. But then the idea is, how do you have a quantitative distinction if extension, is itself kind of just one of these modes that is clearly distinct? It's not a numerical kind of distinction you'd have in extension, like spatial extension or whatnot. So the question is, how does this work? So Deleuze says this can work through these intensive distinctions, like a pot of water where you've got, it's boiling, it's got all these different degrees in it, but they're not distinct in this way where it's kind of like a numerical distinction of just all the same different components metrically kind of, schematized and divided. Instead, so they calls those intensive parts. And it says that's what the modal essence is. So the modal essence is this intensive part, which is the power of something, the power to affect and be affected. And then you've got modal existence, which is this extensive part of the mode. And this has to do with all these simple bodies, these simple parts that are in external relations with each other and are constantly sort of interacting with other things, this kind of external thing, which maybe this kind of illuminates some of what the question about, the gorilla uncle and whatnot coming from the outside. So you've got these external relations with bodies going on, and there's a corresponding, so any relation has a modal relation, a modal existence. It's this kind of, it's inherently composite, but this composite also has a modal essence that corresponds to it, which is a power. It's an intensive part of the attribute, which is kind of like a total power in a way, or it's power kind of taken to infinity, kind of the limit of that type of power. So specifically the power of thinking, the power of thought, and the extension of thought, and then the power of I guess it would be existing is the one for extension. So anyways, you've got those different components all kind of working together. And the idea of the parallelism, though, is that those attributes, they don't causally interact kind of on this level. Instead, it's because they have a shared identity in substance itself, in this kind of primary production. That's what allows them to be coordinated in some way, while at the same time being distinct in a kind of causal sense on at least one level. it's actually quite difficult to describe. Although, I mean, I could probably post something in the Discord if you're really interested. But I think that's the biggest point, is to think about it, is that, okay, that's also how you can have these residuums, or I guess it'd be residua. Yeah, there we go. With my Latin degree, confusing all these plurals, but so the residuum of a subject, I think you could see that as something kind of how that can go along with it and be parallel, correspond with it in some way, but not correspond on a level of kind of with these other, kind of. So I'm still not quite sure exactly what, Hunter, when you're talking about the kind of the objective order on Discord, exactly what that meant. But I was thinking, if you see that in a very kind of almost like a crass way of where it's just kind of simple, dumb objects or whatnot, my water bottle or whatever, the thing that philosophers always point to that's right in front of them. It's like water or a desk or a chair, something like that. That's basically, okay, if you take that as the objective order, then that's going to be the thing that there's no causal interaction between those and the subject. And I think you can kind of see that in terms of this parallelism. But then it has to do with partial objects. So I don't know. There's something even more technical going on probably than that. Although I think the key to that is where they specifically actually say how this corresponds with Spinoza, which has to do with, maybe we'll get there when we get to page 327. So what time is it? It's already 9 o'clock.
It's time for you to get a watch and also for us to hit the dusty trail, I think.
My brain is exhausted and also full of alcohol, so.
Mine too. I drank a really big Dos Equis lime and salt. It's completely, it's empty. That bad boy. Yee! All right. Yeah.
I specifically chose not to drink because I had to go drive.
Oh, that's fun. Look, I'm still
Would have been funner to drink and drive, but
yeah. Hey, safe driving. I like the statistic. It's like, do you know that 25% of all motor vehicle accidents occur because of drunk driving? Which means that 75% of them occur because of sober driving, which means that you're at a much lower risk of getting an accident if you drink and drive. I love abusing statistics. So
it's a good differential calculus there.
Oh hell yeah. So yeah, I'm still thinking that I need to get more jiggy with whatever the objective order means, but I'm still kind of thinking that maybe Deleuze and Guattari think that maybe the subject is somewhere that's able to be located, even if it's somewhere residual or kind of slimy. I think a slime with you guys, with those two guys. There's a lot of slime talk, a lot of slimes and creams and so on.
Okay, I said stay with the slime. In Being and Nothingness, Sartre he talks about slime for a good number of pages. Are you aware of this?
You've read Being and Nothingness?
Not the whole thing, but
yeah, me neither.
Yeah, it's a very large book. By the way, apparently Deleuze read Being and Nothingness, or he memorized it in a week when he was 18, and he had taken his first philosophy class like a year before. And he was like, oh, this is the thing I want to do. And then a year later, just like read and apparently memorized Being in Nothingness in a week. But yeah, anyways, I've looked through it. And I can't remember why I was looking through it for this reason, but I think it's in one of the later sections. It talks about slime for quite a while. It's probably at least like 10 pages.
Well,
Slime.
to me, Deleuze is still the philosopher of slimes and liquids and goop.
Hicks.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Hicks and goops and stuff like that.
Okay. I'm somewhat. The reason that somewhat bothers me is Graham Harman said something kind of like that, and Graham Harman is a fucking idiot and a charlatan, and so I'll just say that. Yeah.
That's good.
I saw him speak, and he's okay. So my thesis advisor, he kind of like the only person to really kind of ask him a really probing question, like, you make this distinction, but it doesn't really make any sense. Can you explain that? And he's just kind of like, I don't know about that. That's not the reason why I dislike him. There's a lot of other reasons, but I saw him speak, and I thought it was interesting that yeah, he's got like a cool catchphrase, like the triple O, object-oriented ontology. But yeah, I think he's a fad, isn't he? He's kind of like good marketing, but then his whole thing is just objects withdraw. I can explain everything now. This one action, everything withdraws. Yes, you can quote me on that too. Object-oriented ontology is definitely a fad, and luckily it's already on its way out. The sooner it gets out, the better, because it's fucking garbage. I don't know. It's awful. It explains nothing. It simply says, like, we can't really know objects as they withdraw. Oh, cool. Wow, good job. Don't need to read anything else. So yeah, Graham Harman is yeah, fuck him. And all the people that are underneath him, they like get on blogs and like write stuff, like, and anybody says anything bad about it, and like they freak out, and yeah, like, oh my god. Oh, and the undermining and overmining thing, it's just stupid. It's just, don't read Graham Harman. Like, save yourself. There's so many other things to read. Don't do it. Just completely forget about them.
Good idea.
I'm glad to hear that I can throw that out of my list of things to care about.
Yeah, just it's terrible.
Now wait just a dang second. What if there's a line of flight about the what? Aren't you being so? I don't. You're.
I'm sure there is, but fuck it. I don't know.
The by university.
You got to select these things, and I'm making this selection right here. I'm cutting Graham Harman out, and I suggest boldly that everyone else in the universe does too.
See, Chase once told me, he was like, I like the idea of the book burning. I just think they burn the wrong books. I think that everybody that thinks that, I remember Chase went on this big long thing about, some people need to be destroyed. He's yeah, you're right. Graham Harman is out of the family. Are you being at your cats? Are you going like that? You keep going like you keep going like that.
That was a belch. I just don't have as expressive belches.
Nice. There's a lot of strange belching going on in here.
Yeah, this is a bad day of belches. All right, look, we gotta go. We gotta leave. Okay,
yeah.
That's enough.
Yeah, we gotta go. Yeah, I gotta drive. Oh.
I gotta pee and play
drive.
Why?
It's a long story.
Tell it in the Discord.
Okay, my car's battery is failing. It doesn't